What's going on, everyone? Happy 2023. Another year has come to a close, which means the annual Best Films of the Year list is in order. As far as what I thought of the year of 2022 in film, it was another great year, but what made it truly special was how original and exciting some of these films turned out to be. I really do think that it laid to rest the gripes of nothing is original anymore, or that Hollywood is out of ideas. And to those people who still share these thoughts, I invite all of you to several great films out there that definitely quenched my thirst and hopefully yours. It's easy to get only accustomed to the mainstream blockbuster films of sequels, superhero films, and reboots as studios release these films even outside of the summer season. I myself thoroughly enjoyed these films such as Prey, Top Gun: Maverick, Avatar: The Way of Water, and The Multiverse of Madness. But it's when filmmakers succeed at original ideas that deserve equal attention, and I can think of over 10 films from last year that proved this true. Before I go further, as I mentioned last year, I haven't seen every single film released in 22. As much as I love to watch these before making this list, the discussion of best films of 22 by then would be well overdue. So films on my to-watch list like Men, Women Talking, Decision to Leave, After Sun, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish will unfortunately sit out for this list. For now, I'll be sharing my personal favorites. Go ahead and like and subscribe, leave a comment down below to share some of your favorite films from 22, and ring the bell for all my future videos. Speaking of videos, right after you finish this one, you can check out my completed 52-week movie challenge series where I've reviewed a different film for a different theme. There's a wide diversity of films included in this series, from the most recent releases, art house faves, and iconic classics as well. Aside from that, you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at FilmGeekDave, as well as my letterbox for all of the films I watched on my free time. Before we go on to the top 10, here are a few honorable mentions, starting with Kimi. Talk about doing so much with so little. This latest thriller from director Steven Soderbergh shows that you don't really need that many bells and whistles to make a good film. This was a first-rate thriller with a compellingly paranoid angle that once again proves that with this and The Batman, Zoe Kravitz is an undeniable talent. The unbearable weight of massive talent. I have to say, this really underwhelmed me. I found this film a completely bearable weight of massive talent, so I unfortunately have to rate this film a scathing 9 out of 10. Psych! Seriously though, this was easily one of the funniest films that I saw all year, in a premise that seems both ridiculously zany but a ton of fun to watch. Even for someone who's not entirely fluent in the Cage Man himself, watching Cage play a heightened version of himself in what's essentially a heist comedy provided me with a purely hilarious ride from start to finish. It also gets some brownie points for recognizing the masterpiece that is Paddington 2.
Paddington 2 is incredible.
Yes, Cage, it really is f***ing incredible. Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Despite being another comic book sequel, the execution, ideas, and spectacle truly made this feel like something original. I'm gonna be in the minority when I say that this movie is the best in a lot of ways. It's the best film in Marvel's Phase 4 lineup, it's my pick for the best superhero film of the year, and sue me, I actually found it on par, if not above, the last film. It's tough not talking about Wakanda Forever without mentioning the passing of Chadwick Boseman, but while the film gives such a sobering eulogy to both his characters and spirit, the film nonetheless both expands and improves upon the strengths and weaknesses of the first Black Panther respectively. Wakanda Forever still feels like a singularly thrilling and an even more thoughtful superhero epic. Letitia Wright makes for an excellent lead amid a magnificent ensemble cast that includes a breakout performance by Tenoch Huerta Mejia and a show-stopping performance from Angela Bassett. Even at well over 2.5 hours, director Ryan Coogler expertly paces the film's epic scope with no fat to trim in a sweeping and action-packed story of loss, colonialism, and vengeance. And my number one honorable mentions film that just barely missed the cut for my top 10 list is Turning Red. If this film barely made my top 10 list for the best films of 22, then I'd say it truly was a damn good year. As for Turning Red, this film represented every bit the step forward for Pixar in quality, an excellent change of pace in an anime-style approach to animation that both made me excited and laughed to no end, an effortlessly lovable cast of characters, and a story of family, friendship, and self-acceptance told with considerable depth, imagination, and brilliant Asian representation to boot reminded me why the studio remains one of the crown jewels of the animation industry. This was a film that single-handedly made me excited for the future of writer-director Domi Shi and all the future original ideas that Pixar has in store, no matter how many light years that Pixar releases. With that honorable mention list out of the way, on to my top 10. The Banshees of Insherin. As a follow-up to writer-director Martin McDonagh's last film, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, The Banshees of Insherin delivers on all of the morbid hilarity and solemn pathos that's come to be expected. I love how McDonagh's able to take a premise of 2 friends who just spontaneously split up and find the absurdity of the situation, but also really dive deep into some existential questions. It is weird when people suddenly decide not to be friends anymore, but what does that say about how one day those people mean little to you? Is it because they changed? We changed? Or is just there something different to look forward to in life? The performances from Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell as Calm and Padraic respectively are so good that they make these questions feel so emotionally approachable, but they also bring out deeply flawed natures from desperation and indifference that also make these characters so dysfunctional, but never to the point where they get annoying or unlikable. I wanted to see Padraic in some way, shape, or form mend his conflict with Calm, but I also felt why Calm wanted to move on with his life. By the same token, these characters are hilarious for just how far they'll go for or in spite of each other. Special shout out goes to Carrie Condon as Padraic's sister Shaban, who's able to understand this lost friendship but not afraid to call out just how terrible these former friends are at communicating with each other. It's easy to look at this film and disparage it as a pointless downer, but the added dark comedy to the film in a sense makes peace with this pointlessness, easily making it a solid number 10 on the list. Pinocchio. No. There we go. But not just Pinocchio, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. And it deserves that moniker in every way, shape, and form. I love how this film really considered the far more existential side of this story. The fabrics of life, death, love, and loss are felt everywhere in this film. While this is easily the darkest adaptation of the character out there, it never feels like it's posturing its darkness. Everything just felt so natural and alive that it makes the dark retelling feel freshly human again. Geppetto isn't the heavenly father figure, but a grieving drunk. But it makes sense given he's not only lost his son, but feels forced to accept this puppet as his new one. Having Pinocchio as this relentlessly optimistic and cheerful character at first would get on my nerves, but it made all the more sense when I thought about it. Here's a character who has absolutely no concept on life and death, to where this curiosity and joy ultimately turns into a clash against the fascist backdrop in the world. It's creating a naive innocent in disguise as a rebel that was so clever looking back on it. It also paves way to some great comedy, like when Pinocchio comes to life as this childlike Frankenstein's monster. It's threatening, but totally hilarious to the point where Del Toro doesn't even need to make a Frankenstein adaptation. Pinocchio already is one from a certain point of view to begin with. Trading in the whimsical poet that is the old Jiminy Cricket in favor of this Sebastian J. Cricket makes for a great contrast to Pinocchio's journey. In fact, now that I think about it, the contrast is simply brilliant. As Pinocchio learns to cherish life through dying, Sebastian learns to cherish death through living. This was such a poetic contrast between these two characters that it was just perfect. Everyone's talked about this aspect of the film, but the animation is totally a work of art, capturing all the little mistakes the characters make, but also able to get great acting out of these characters through these models. I really hope this is the film that convinces people to consider animation as an accomplished medium, rather than something that's always geared towards kids, or even merely raunchy TV shows for adults. I love both these kinds of shows, but this rendition of Pinocchio really breaks the mold as something that mature kids and adults can enjoy as a beautifully animated and told fantasy film. See it if you haven't already. All Quiet on the Western Front. I, like most people, consider Lewis Milestone's 1930 anti-war classic of the same name to be one of the crowning jewels of not just the war genre, but in all of cinema. So I was curious to what this film would bring to the table. After watching this film, I realized that this latest take on All Quiet on the Western Front does its best in retaining its faithfulness to the source material about World War I, while also using all the current technology we have to make a story even better. No, I will not compare versions. There definitely have been plenty of great war films as of late, like Dunkirk, 1917, and Hacksaw Ridge, but for as much as these films excellently capture the carnage and devastation of war, there's always a sense of triumph by the time the credits roll. All Quiet on the Western Front does depict these similar brutalities, but it surpasses all of these films in this one important area. It depicts war as not only a hell, but also a profoundly cancerous failure of humanity. Even when there's a moment of relief, there's still a sense of dread throughout the film. Director Edward Berger still paces out this story to where it's not constant non-stop action, but he never lets us off the hook with the experiences of war. Moments of reprieve and survival are because of sheer luck, and these characters can die at any moment. The filmmaking on display that depicts this war, one that best highlights storytelling through cinematography, editing, music, and production design, shows all the nightmarish warfare on display better than what dialogue could ever achieve. Even when characters do speak, they sound like real characters instead of movie characters. And when these characters that start off as naive patriots are degraded to horrified and helpless victims, I was utterly heartbroken. Felix Kammerer's lead performance captures all of this to a T. In terms of new additions, there's a subplot where Daniel Broa plays this character who works behind the scenes so he can stop World War I. What makes this addition so brilliant is that, as before, Berger communicates his anti-war message through different perspectives, but he never lets us off the hook even as the war ends. Even a few people dying is still treated as a profound tragedy rather than a noble sacrifice. So when a goal is met, it's still shrouded with all the loss and pain that World War I brought. I love when a film is able to take the good with the bad in any given situation, but is still able to resist making sense of any victory in this film. There are no winners in any war, only the people who die and survive. This latest iteration proves that some pieces of source material refuse to age with time and still have relevance nearly a century later. The menu. Just when I was about to start production on this video, along came The Menu on HBO Max. And better late than never, I always say. Watching this film felt like watching a lost Alfred Hitchcock film with some of its ideas. Mistaken identity, blistering tension, mysterious characters, and a dark sense of humor all wrapped up in a film that made me wince and howl with laughter. Despite being about the food industry, I loved how director Mark Mylod was able to translate that analogy to a satirical takedown of the privileged upper class. I'm much more likely to go for a cheeseburger than a 5-star meal, but I find that replacing food with something like movies still makes this commentary accessible, let alone with any other art form. What it all comes down to is that there will always be a group of people who are so insanely convinced that what they're figuratively and literally consuming is worth more than what it really is, that they'll go so far as to shame everybody for not thinking of their level. A couple drops of food isn't a culinary masterpiece? Nonsense! It's an artistic expression that's barely worth eating at all. The performances are all excellent across the board. Ralph Fiennes was the best out of all of them for coming across as an eloquent and esteemed host, but hiding behind such a thin veil of indifference and dismissiveness that when he shares his true feelings with the guests, it's uncomfortably hilarious. Anya Taylor-Joy is also fantastic, and I swear to God, Nicholas Hoult is so good as every one of the most pretentious film bros wrapped into one. When he finally gets his comeuppance in the end, I'm sorry, that was hilarious. I rolled on the floor laughing when it happened. Also, Ralph Fiennes blowing the place up with everyone else on it was great. I swear to God, that was probably the hardest I laughed and cheered at an ending all year. I've heard some people have criticisms over the ending and that it tied a bow too neatly, but I honestly thought it brought together its message in full circle. Like I said, these people create a phony illusion around art that's so strong to the point where they come across as gatekeepers and even yet idiots. So there's nothing wrong with eating a cheeseburger and fries over a souffle and vice versa. See this movie if you want a sick laugh. Tar. Okay, now we're getting into the great stuff. On the surface, this looks like the kind of film that looks slow, dry, and understated. While it's definitely all of those things, the absolutely last thing that Tar was is boring. It's a meticulously subtle and profoundly challenging character study of how artistic perfection clashes with the messiness of the human condition. It's easy to take a magnificent actress like Cate Blanchett for granted, but the key to what makes her performance truly sublime was how invested and unpretentious she comes across with her love for music. Every time she speaks, it's as if she's fluently speaking another language. And as someone who knows next to nothing about music theory, the fact that I was still invested in what she had to say poses as a serious achievement. At a runtime of 2.5 hours, this is where the brilliant pacing comes in. This is an excruciatingly objective point of view, and every scene with the titular character is a spellbinding invitation into her psyche. We feel like writer-director Todd Phillips thinks of us as smart to form our own conclusions of this character's choices, and even her own menial tasks feel totally engrossing. There's a brilliant one-er towards the beginning of the film where Tar has an impromptu class debate with the student over how we should refer to past figures of classical music given their possible prejudices like homophobia, sexism, racism, and the like. The easy way out is for the answer to come in front of us as the clear indicator of Tar's inevitable downfall from grace, not Todd Phillips. In his hands, both Tar and the student share things that are uniquely right and wrong about this subject, and it's up to us to form our own conclusions. But it never contradicts Tar's tragic character arc. Every year during awards season, there are always biopics and true stories that dominate this discourse, despite how good some of these films can be. But Tar feels like a marvelous breath of fresh air, a completely original idea. It brought to mind filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick who could wring out the most psychological fascination from a paradox of a character who feels so clinically perfect and humanistically imperfect in an unfeeling world. If you're looking for a challenging drama, look no further than Tar. The Northman. This will seem like an unpopular opinion, but this is my favorite Robert Eggers film to date. It's so exciting to see that big budget epics are still released in the mainstream market and can still deliver on spectacular scale with an incredible story that wears its art house sensibilities on its sleeve. Sure, it's a shame that this film was a major flop at the box office, but that doesn't mean we don't need any more of these challenging and visceral films. Plus, it earned its second chance on home video. I don't usually find myself getting into period epics like these all that much because I always found them too cinematic and not enough like the real world. The Northman, however, was a perfect antidote to that. Eggers does what he does best in his films and gives the world of the Northman an identity all its own that does justice to its time period while also making the mysticism of the film feel completely alive. It's not like in the Marvel films or even in the Avatar series where the lore is fully explained to the 9th degree. In The Northman, it instead balances between connecting the lore to the characters and story while also leaving enough of it a mystery to make it feel so cosmically large. I love how overcast, cold, dirty, and unpleasant this world is, as well as how these Vikings are portrayed as the ruthless and violent savages that history always recorded them as. By the same token, it still feels totally accessible because it still feels balanced between feeling like a classic revenge story and throwing in some curveballs so it doesn't feel too safe and familiar. Not to mention one that served as the original inspiration to William Shakespeare's Hamlet. I mean, the main character has the age rearranged in his name for crying out loud. Every single aspect of The Northman, from the acting, writing, directing, and all the technical elements boil down to a film that genuinely feels audaciously epic. They all perfectly lend to the darkness and mysticism that expand upon recreating the Viking world that feels so much like something historically concrete, but also something grand and cinematic. I wish more period epics like these get made because it proves that you can make a film like this on such a grand scale without having to polish it up to feel safe and marketable. And while it's unfortunate that we won't be getting a Robert Eggers film on this scale anytime soon, I'll take one film like The Northman over a million gladiators on any day of the week. RRR. I know it's strange ranking an escapist action epic over what I consider to be some profoundly thematic films, but this was easily the most exciting popcorn movie that I've seen in years. Looking at this film, you'd think I was crazy. The action is over the top, the sped up frame rate is totally apparent, the characters are painted in such broad strokes, and it has the subtlety of a dragon flying through a tornado of fire while their rider does guitar riffs to Judas Priest while square dancing. Does that happen in the movie? No. but that is its energy. But I digress. What makes RRR so different and a cut above most modern blockbusters is that it's both unafraid to crank up its energy to 11, but it also wears that same energy with a big, dumb, goofy grin on its face. The theatricality of the film is so unrestrained and glorious that it's hard not to admire how big they go. I mean, look at this scene, and this one, and that one, and also this one. This is a film that revels in how spectacular it is that it turns it into a unique work of chaotic art. Even when the CGI sticks out with the animals and other things, RRR already feels like an ecstatic fever dream that it becomes part of the fun. It honestly speaks to how refreshingly in-camera and sleek this film looks. The good news is that all of it's anchored by its two leads. Instead of a grim race to save the world from total destruction that'll ultimately pave way to sequels or a cinematic universe, here is a story rooted in what's essentially a simple friendship told on a lavishly epic scale. Not to mention, it's totally free of any of the cynical and self-aware humor that weighs down some other films. RRR's core foundation in all of this is one of cinema's most enduring bromances that's about as good as an endorsement of positive masculinity if I ever saw one. Both of these characters are insanely likable to where I become ecstatic when they celebrate their friendship, and I grow genuinely sad when they suffer rifts through their friendships. The choreography is in a class all its own. I mean, look at this dance number. This is like Step in Time from Mary Poppins on steroids. It just keeps building and building to a climax that once again furthers the film's central friendship, not as a means to pause the story. Even the action sequences are hilariously glorious, but because the film already has a romanticized approach to its actual history, it fits in the film perfectly. I just crack up at some of these. No winking to the camera, no self-aware jokes pointing out how crazy this all is. Everyone in the film is convinced of the world that RRR presents without a hint of cynicism. Let me just say that I have never seen a Tollywood film, so I consider RRR my introduction to this type of film. After watching this one, all I can say is that I can't wait to see more. That's definitely the best aspect to RRR, a film of such staggeringly widespread appeal that it transcends all language barriers, bringing these sensibilities to newfound international audiences who otherwise wouldn't think twice of watching this kind of film. What else can I say except enjoy 3 hours of laughs, cheers, and glory. Babylon. After seeing this film, I felt like I just got off a roller coaster, and I was giggling with glee before I could make any coherent sentences. With that said, I can definitely see why this film did get a polarizing reception that it did. It's long and unapologetically chaotic, and to be honest, those are some of the reasons why I love this film so much. In fact, this was the film for me that solidified writer-director Damien Chazelle in my eyes as one of the greatest filmmakers working today. I'll go by a case-by-case analysis to share my thoughts on Babylon compared to some of the criticisms against it. As for the runtime, I was never bothered by it at all. The film still felt structured to where it never felt aimless. The first act of the film concerns the silent era, the second the rise of the talkies, and the third the fallout and how everyone dealt with their precarious careers. It's all paced so well, and these acts transition with each other so fluidly that it neither felt rushed nor jarring in transition. As for the chaotic nature of the film, I actually found that addition ingenious. There's such a pervading outlook on silent films as these squeaky clean and innocuous relics of the past that it's hard to believe that anything spicy or naughty appeared behind the scenes. I was pleasantly surprised to hear from behind the scenes how seriously they took the historical accuracy of the film. By the same token, none of the spectacle feels self-indulgent because Chazelle keenly ties this to the spirit of the silent era rebelling against the rise of the talkies. Just look at the scene where Margot Robbie's character has to interact with the bougie crowd. Doesn't it feel so suffocating and stuffy compared to the massive party at the beginning of the film? Plus, the opening scene with the elephant set me into hysterics, and it just perfectly set the mood of the film. A perverse epic that reveals that Hollywood was just as cutthroat back in the day as it is today. In fact, it lives up to the title. Yeah, why Babylon for a title instead of something like Hollywood? I always thought it sounded like something epic, but upon further inspection, it's a violent mixture of excess and downfall that shaped the rest of civilization. A perfect analogy of the silent era going out with a bang instead of a whimper. As far as thoughts of my own are concerned, concerned, I thought Babylon furthered Giselle's skills in emphasizing the sacrifices of the road to greatness. So many stories take that for granted that it's grown predictable and safe. When we get to the end where the main character looks back at all the sacrifices taken to get to a future of cinema, it retains the magic of the journey, but remembers all the sacrifices it took to get there, making all the tragic turns of some of these characters all the more heartbreaking. Babylon as a whole is still spectacular. The performances are among some of the best of their careers, the direction was usually outstanding, the editing was perfect, the production design was vividly realized, given how everything is practically done for shooting on film, and Justin Hurwitz's score is so rapturous that I still listen to this album during my trips to work and home. Much like the Northman, it's a shame that these big budget dramas aren't doing well as they used to, but they're still amazing to watch when IP blockbusters dominate the multiplexes. Even as I could see myself not liking this film all that much, I still couldn't deny that Babylon was a film made by a master filmmaker in complete control of his craft, and going as far as he possibly can with a film like this. The Fabelmans. 2022 has certainly been the year for long movies, hasn't it? As long as they validate their runtime, as most of them have, it doesn't bother me in the slightest. And what a coincidence that Steven Spielberg's follow-up to West Side Story also ranks number 2 on my best of the year list for the second consecutive year in a row. I think it's anything but a coincidence. The Fabelmans is an emotionally complex film, extraordinarily acted by Gabriel LaBelle, Paul Dano, Michelle Williams, and among others, and a masterfully crafted memoir film for a bevy of reasons. First of all, the trailers sold a film that initially looked like a life-affirming coming-of-age story with a typically celebratory outlook on the magic of making and watching movies that seemed like typical Spielbergian fare. While there's some truth to some of the emotional highs of the film, I see a much deeper story than that. It's a much more psychologically provocative story about how through projecting the images we put onto the screen, we, whether we like it or not, share an emotionally fixed outlook on the world. No matter what the pictures tell us, it only tells a fraction of what's going on, if not a complete reimagining of the real world. In fact, they could even reflect what we yearn for. The scenes of a young Sammy Fabelman in a breakout performance by LaBelle all reflect this, remaking the famous train crash from Cecile B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth, the Campfire Home movie, and the Senior Ditch Day video all evoke Sammy coming to grips with fear, his family's fragility, and feeling caught between what he wants to be versus who he really is. The scene that stuck out to me the most was when Sammy confronts his mother in an excellent performance by Williams over her affair. Seeing through Sammy's eyes what an angelic figure he sees her out to be, only to peel back behind the facade to see a much more complicated person that defies all of Sammy's preconceptions, especially moved me to tears. All of these moments are crafted in a dramatic subtlety that allows these amazing performances from these actors and a perfect screenplay by Spielberg and Tony Kushner to speak for themselves rather than have that sentimentality be insisted for us. I also reject the notion that anybody could have directed The Fabelmans because being that this is a memoir film about a filmmaker who's given us some of the most iconic and cherished films from the past 50 years, it actually enriches Spielberg's previous works with so much emotional context. Close Encounters in E.T. for dysfunctional families, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Schindler's List for coming to grips with his Jewish faith, and among several others are examples that while I definitely immersed myself into the backstories of these films, it's still a rewarding invitation to audiences who may not have had that information. With that said, Spielberg still balances all of these emotionally provocative musings in The Fabelmans with lovely and jovial energy that still shows that for all the faults his parents held, Spielberg still shows love for them for endowing a love of magic and science that would ingrain within the director's films. The Fabelmans, much like West Side Story, marks yet another masterpiece in the twilight of Spielberg's career. If he makes yet another excellent film on par with these last two films, then this will be the best he's ever been since the 90s. And my pick for the best film of 22 is Everything Everywhere All at Once. This movie is a fucking miracle. It's a miracle in ways for which I longed and in several others of which I could never have imagined. It's one of the most accomplished fusions of genre I've ever seen in my life. It's an imaginative cornucopia of science fiction and fantasy, a relentlessly kinetic feat of martial arts, a dark and absurd comedy about the random and arbitrary fabrics of life, but best of all, it's all tied together with a poignant and compassionate drama about self-acceptance acceptance with family and existence. Any one of these genres would have inspired an excellent film in their own rights, but having all of these meshed together, all while having the dramatic weight that ties these all together in a way that comes off as coherent as a whole, was the greatest miracle I've seen in a movie in a long time. I laughed, cheered, gasped, felt moved, and couldn't even predict how this story would even unfold from beginning to end. This and Swiss Army Man proved this quickly that the Daniels are some of the most audacious and imaginative filmmakers working today. It's the ultimate proof that top-tier cinema isn't limited to quiet, realistic dramas about the real world, but it can all be about vision, ambition, and originality. The controlled chaos in the film always abides by its own set of rules, not as an arbitrary onslaught. Now, all of this could easily dissipate upon a second viewing, since the first one is all about the surprise and wonder of a vision such as this. As someone who saw this film twice, I can safely say that Everything Everywhere All at Once can and will benefit from multiple viewings. One for how sheerly entertaining it is, but also for how complex this film is without even trying or even looking like it. As I've said, a family drama about a woman confined to a bleak and meaningless existence and making the best out of it would have made a good film. But the inclusions of all these other genres, from science fiction to martial arts, felt like natural extensions into enriching the comedic and dramatic potential of such a personal story such as this, rather than just for spectacle's sake. It single-handedly validates all the artistic prowesses of these genres, and in a current era where genre and comedy films still have certain stigmas against them, it couldn't have arrived at a more perfect time. It's the year 2023, so it's far too early to consider what are the best films of this current decade. With that said, Everything Everywhere All at Once has started that conversation at a distant first place. If Hollywood and indie filmmakers manage to make films on par, if not better than what we have here, then I can't begin to imagine the cinematic discoveries that I'll make for the decade to come. Could the 2020s end up as one of the greatest decades for film? Well, we'll have to see. For now, Everything Everywhere All at Once is not only the best film of 2022, but it's the best film to come out in a long time.